The playoffs are here as they kick off here in just under an hour. We're here to talk about the lineups today for NBA DFS. Adam, man, how you feeling on opening day of the playoffs, man?
Pretty good. Obviously, been spending a lot of time on it, so hopefully it goes well. But it's exciting. It's nice to have 4 games or 8 games, depending on the slate, and them all matter again. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah, of course, today's slate, 4-game slates, all kicks off here just under an hour from now with the Jazz and Nuggets. Then it's the Nets and the Raptors, and 76ers Celtics, and wraps up with the Mavericks and the Clippers. I know earlier today, but I guess about 2 hours ago, you were on with Josh breaking all these down. So I want to kind of go around here, obviously answer questions, whether it's on Slack or on YouTube about these games. And as I was watching you and Josh, the one player that really stuck out to me that I kind of want to talk about, and we've got huge ownership on him on DraftKings, is Jordan Clarkson. 66% we got him right now, under an hour before lock. What's your take on Jordan Clarkson, and is he worth the punt play?
Yeah, I'm just not really able to get away from it. I understand that in large field tournaments, there's always the argument, and it's not that it's an incorrect argument, but when someone's getting this kind of ownership, to just hope something goes wrong and that you're competing with a third of the field at that point. But he's just so cheap, especially, on DraftKings where you have more roster flexibility. He's only 3,800. On FanDuel, there's at least a little bit of opportunity cost with him, since you can only roster 2 shooting guards and he costs you one of those spots. He still should be really popular there too. But on DraftKings, where you can move guys around a lot more, and he's only 3,800, it's really difficult to see how he really kills you. Obviously he's not the best real life basketball player, but he's going to go out there and shoot. He's going to play big minutes, whether he starts or not. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they keep him coming off the bench, but I fully expect him to be in the closing lineup as long as the game's competitive. He has about a 25% usage rate. You're just not really going to find the minutes and the usage from anyone else in this price tier that you get from Jordan Clarkson. So I think that there's plenty of spots you can differentiate elsewhere. There's a ton of really good plays on this slate. I'm personally not looking to do it with what I think is the clear top, point per dollar value.
His ownership is much higher on DK than it is FanDuel. FanDuel just under 30%. If someone in the chat had asked about that. Do you like him as much on FanDuel as you do DraftKings?
No, not as much on FanDuel, just, because you can only roster the 2 shooting guards. So, naturally, if Jordan Clarkson's in your lineup, you're losing, at least one of, Paul George or Luka or Karis LeVert or Mitchell or Van Vliet. It's a lot tougher there. Especially again, because Paul George does have shooting guard eligibility, and I think obviously he's a great play. So it's a lot tougher to get the Clarkson there. I still think he's a really good value, at only 4,400. But the opportunity cost comes into play a lot more than it does on DraftKings, where you can move him around and still get pretty much any players that you want.
Do you like him on SuperDraft?
Not sure what his multiplier is.
I'm pulling it up right now. 1.7.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. Of course, we are sponsored by SuperDraft. We'll tell you a little bit more about SuperDraft as we go on. Sticking in that guard category and some lower options. I know you guys were talking a lot about Seth Curry, and I know kind of the end of the show you're kind of talking about, if there's a guy with an open shot for the Mavericks, who do you want, Luka or Seth? But obviously at the price point, when you're looking at some of those lower option guards, like Seth Curry was a guy that I was naturally looking at earlier today.
Yeah, and I think he makes sense, especially with the way ownership's distributed right now, and especially on DraftKings. Again, on FanDuel, it's different because of the roster restrictions. But on DraftKings, there's a lot of underpriced value or underpriced guys that are going to play minutes, whether you're talking about Royce O'Neal or OG or Seth Curry. There's a number of guys, and the minutes will be there, but they all have their flaws. None of them are really high usage guys. But Curry's a little bit different than the group because he's a great 3-point shooter. And if he gets hot, he'll get more looks. Whereas guys like OG and Royce O'Neal, they're out there to play defense, to rebound, to do kind of the little things. And sometimes it does still result in a really good fantasy game. But you're really not going to get those games where Royce O'Neal becomes the hot hand for the Jazz that you can, where Seth Curry does for Dallas. And right now the ownership is mostly going to OG Anunoby and to Royce O'Neal. And Seth Curry is going a little bit overlooked at only 14% last I checked it on DraftKings. So I think that it's not going to feel good, but he's only 3,700. And it's really easy, I think, to see at least the path to where he has a big game too. Like there's no real doubt that that Doc Rivers kind of is okay with it if they lose to Dallas because someone other than Doncic or Porzingis has a big game. If they, all the defensive attention is going to Luka and they're forcing, Seth Curry to knock down shot after shot after shot, I think that's probably a result that the Clippers are okay with, as opposed to Luka just torching them. So I think it's at least easy to see how you get there. Not saying that, it's going to work all the time, but I think that with the relatively low ownership going to Seth, he's actually a value play that I'm getting to quite a bit.
Speaking of the Clippers, Montrezl Harrell is, I think, someone that people are going to think about, but I just don't know if I can trust him with not playing in the bubble yet.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. We didn't get, at least as of yet, a hard minutes restriction from Doc Rivers, but we kind of got the implication that he's going to be limited coming back. And so I think it's going to make it really difficult to roster him, especially because he's not inexpensive. So I think the biggest impact that Harrell has is that it does obviously make the minutes for Zubac a lot less secure. Mm-hmm. Him being back in addition to Lou Williams being back, because remember during the bubble, you saw a lot of Zubac getting closing minutes, but you were also playing without Harrell and without Lou Williams. I've actually cut my minutes back on Zubac since the show with Josh because I had overlooked the Lou Williams part. And there's a really good chance that Harrell's too limited to close this game, but that the closing lineup is Beverly, George, Morris, Kawhi, and Lou Williams, and that Zubac is on the bench. So I think that him being back cuts the minutes off of Zubac a little bit, and that matters. But I think it'll be really tough to actually get Harrell into DFS lineups until he's back to full strength.
I know a couple of people in the chat are already asking about Pat Beverly.
Yeah, he's still questionable for this game. I'm going under the assumption that him and Landry Shamet are both able to play. He's only 3,400 on DraftKings. I only have him in for 24 minutes. I think that you see some Lou Williams running point, and I think that Beverly was limited for most of the bubble. Even when he came back, he only played a couple of games, got up to 18 or 20 minutes. So it's tough for me to think he goes out there and plays full run. At 24 minutes, I'll get to a little bit, but you're not really talking about a high usage guy. And there's so many guys in that mid 3K range on DraftKings that I'm not really prioritizing Beverly.
Speaking of guards, I was looking at Joe Harris earlier today. And obviously the Nets, we kind of, look, we expect, them to not last very long against the Raptors. If this thing goes, if they can win one game, people might be surprised. But when you look at what they've done in the bubble, they've scored 115 or more in 6 of the 8 games. Levert's averaging 25. Joe Harris at 20 points per game. And he's landed, I think I saw the figure, 54% from 3. To me, if Joe Harris can start lighting up and connecting on those threes today, I want to say he's 4,700 on DraftKings, and I forget what he's at on FanDuel. He is 4,800. Like, to me, he was a guy that he just kept sticking off the page at me because of the price.
Yeah, it scares me. Going to the Brooklyn guys, really is scary because they are just such an inferior team to Toronto. But the pricing, again, especially on DraftKings, is just so favorable. Especially for Joe Harris and for Karis Levert. Joe Harris has about a 22.5% usage rate, playing alongside Karis Levert without Kyrie or Dinwiddie this year. That's substantially higher than you get when the Nets are at full strength. He's a good shooter. They're going to need him if they want to stay in these games, and he plays big minutes. So it's really tough for me to get away from a cheap Joe Harris. On FanDuel, you have a really cheap Garrett Temple, who looks like a really good value, but again, does come with plenty of opportunity cost. But it's scary because Toronto is just such a better team. It's really easy to see how this game goes sideways, but the pricing, I think, really factors in the risk. If you knew that these games were going to be competitive to the end, then you're probably talking about Joe Harris should be around 6K on DraftKings, and Levert should probably be around like 9K. So getting Levert at 7,600 and Harris at 4,700, I think really factors in any risk that comes with this matchup.
I know another guy y'all were having an interesting discussion about was someone at 4,300, and that being Marc Gasol. And I know you were going back and looking at his number, his minutes played back in last year's playoffs. But at 4,300, I mean, if you're looking for, that under 5K option, I think he's a name that you have to look at.
Yeah, I obviously completely agree. And I'm getting quite a bit above the field on Gasol on DraftKings. There is a lot of opportunity cost at center. It is more of a DraftKings play than a FanDuel play, since you can roster 2 on DraftKings and only 1 on FanDuel. But I think that he's kind of just going under projected across the industry right now, because his minutes during the regular season, he basically splits time with Serge Ibaka. But we saw the same exact thing last year. It's not like last regular season Gasol was playing 30 minutes a game and Ibaka wasn't playing. Gasol was averaging around 24 minutes. Ibaka was averaging about 23 minutes in games that they both played. And then in the playoffs, you saw Gasol averaging over 30 minutes per game and Ibaka drop back to about 20 to 22. I don't really... until we see it, I don't have a reason to think that's any different this year. Gasol still, I think, is the priority here. And, Josh brought up the point that Toronto doesn't need him to beat Brooklyn, which I agree with. But in their first round matchup against Orlando last year, which it's not like Orlando was a juggernaut or anything, Gasol, in the only competitive game where he wasn't in foul trouble, played 32 minutes. In other games, he was on pace for around 30 minutes and lost time to either foul trouble or to blowouts. So, I'm pretty comfortable, until I see otherwise, projecting 28 to 30 minutes for Gasol. And it doesn't give him a high enough projection where if the industry and the field agreed with me, I wouldn't just be jamming over top of them. But since they don't, I think getting to a $4,300 Gasol that I think plays around 30 minutes is a good spot to get to.
As a Magic fan, I'm still blown away that they won 1 game last year against the Raptors. Me and Jordan were kind of chatting before the show, and I was like, yeah, it's nice to have the Magic in the playoffs, but I kind of know what's going to happen. Right. It's one and done. I mean, there's no question about it. Kind of mentioned about the early game. Obviously, all the talk about Mike Conley, being out. He's expected to rejoin the Jazz at some point. What point that'll be, we don't know. Leaving the team for the birth of his son. And I know you even last night you had a tweet basically saying, I don't know how to project, minutes played for this Utah lineup. Like, what is your thoughts on Utah?
I think that, so the nice thing from a DFS standpoint, and obviously this could be wrong, but I feel relatively confident in it, is that whoever the minutes go to outside of the main guys shouldn't matter. It might be Moutier getting some backup minutes. It might be Oni who jumped into the rotation in the bubble. And I just saw a tweet from a Utah beat writer that suggested that he thinks Oni and Brantley are going to both be in the rotation. But I don't think from a DFS standpoint it should really matter. I think that you're just going to get more minutes for the main guys, Mitchell, O'Neal, Gobert, Ingles. I think Clarkson plays a ton of minutes, and that Niang probably picks up, low to mid 20s. So I'm not too concerned about what the backup rotation looks like. I think it's entirely possible that Oni starts in Conley's place, but I think that will just be as a placeholder most likely, and that Clarkson would get most of the minutes. So I'm not too concerned about it, other than I don't think someone like Moutier should be getting, should be in lineups unless he actually starts.
On the Denver side of thing, obviously you talked about how much you like Jokic. In the spot, Michael Porter Jr. averaging 19 points in these bubble games. I mean, clearly he's become a huge part of that rotation, since the bubble started here. Do you like Michael Porter here?
It's really tough to get to. So to double back real quick, we actually just got news that Juwan Morgan is starting in place of Mike Conley. That's not someone I expect to play big minutes at all. I expect he'll probably start each half. So I think basically I'm just giving the minutes that I was giving to Emmanuel Moutier to him, and it's not really changing anything else for Utah. As far as Porter goes, it's just really difficult for me to get to him on this slate. I think he plays big minutes. This isn't a matchup that I'm really concerned about for him, because there's not that many, there's not wings on Utah that are going to give him trouble from a defensive standpoint. And I think he does play big minutes here. His usage should take a little bit of a hit now that Jamal Murray's back relative to what he was doing in the bubble. Replacing Monte Morris with Jamal Murray is a pretty big deal, obviously. It makes Porter clearly the third, if not fourth option offensively, depending on how involved Millsap is. So that's tough. But then also looking at the power forward position, you have what I think is an underpriced Pascal Siakam. You have Jason Tatum, who should play monster minutes and is phenomenal. You have a lot of guys you can go to there. So I think maybe he's a little bit easier to get to on FanDuel. I think a little bit cheaper there. I'm pulling it up, double check. But on DraftKings, It's, I think, just kind of hard for me to get there. He's 6,800 on FanDuel, which puts him 1,500 less expensive than Tatum, and Siakam's not a power forward; he's a small forward, so probably a little bit easier to get to there.
Of course, this is NBA Live Before Lock, and we are sponsored by SuperDraft. The future of daily fantasy sports has arrived. Experience SuperDraft's exclusive game mode multiplier. Say goodbye to salary restriction and load of lineup freedom. Use your fantasy sports knowledge to draft any player you want and build your very own dream team. Countless line of possibilities let you experience daily fantasy sports the way you want. SuperDraft offers contests for NBA, MLB, PGA, NASCAR, and MMA, so you can enjoy the best of DFS all year round. Sign up for SuperDraft today using the promo code Awesemo10, and it's $10 free on your first deposit of $10 or more, and $20 total free on your first deposit of $100 or more. Download in the App Store or play at superdraft.io. SuperDraft, no limits, more winning. Of course, we do got a promo going on over at Awesemo.com for the NBA playoffs. Get an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $8.24 when you use the promo code MAMBA at checkout. That's 50% off all of Awesemo's premium NBA DFS tools and content, including player projections, ownership projections, and the boom bust tool and more. This offer is valid through Mamba Day on 8/24. We'll get into some questions here over in the chat. I know people are asking about Robert Williams of the Celtics, and should he be getting all the love that he's getting?
Well, I mean, he's not getting actual ownership, is he? I hope. I mean, I don't think he should be. But the backup center rotation for the Celtics, I think, is kind of up in the air. Obviously, for most of the season, it was Enes Kanter, but there were some signs towards the end of the seeding games that Robert Williams, potentially has passed him. Two games ago for Boston, you had the starters start, and Enes Kanter was the first center off the bench ahead of Williams in the first half. But then in the second half, Williams came in before Kanter did. So kind of tough to take anything away from that. In the final game, Boston rested all of their starters. Enes Kanter started. Robert Williams only played 6 minutes. So in a game where essentially the main rotation guys were not playing, not the best sign to see Enes Kanter getting the start. But I still think, kind of remains to be seen. Josh and I talked about it a bit this morning. The way I'm approaching that is obviously I'm not trusting either guy with a large percentage of my exposures, but they are both cheap enough, again, on DraftKings where you can roster two centers. Kanter's 3,100, Williams is 3K. They're both over a fantasy point per minute player. One of them most likely is playing at least 15, 16 minutes here. And so I like the idea. What I ended up doing is just projecting them both for like 15 minutes. It gets them both to like 17 to 18 DraftKings points. They're not going to get in a ton of my lineups, but they're going to be in, a handful, so that if one of these guys, whichever of these guys does play, and obviously I'm not playing them together, whichever of these guys does get those backup minutes, I'll at least be over the field, considering we have them both projected for about 1% ownership.
What's your thoughts on Luka Doncic on FanDuel at 10,200?
I think he's going to be a much better play on FanDuel. I'm not getting to a whole lot of him on DraftKings, but on FanDuel you have 10-2 is obviously a good salary. He's a little bit less valuable in terms of the way he produces because turnovers are deducted more on FanDuel, and that's obviously a problem for him. You don't get double-double or triple-double bonuses, but 10,200 is a really cheap price tag. Shooting guard is a pretty deep position. Paul George, I think, really stands out along with Luka. But in addition to Levert and Clarkson and Mitchell and Van Vliet, but I think it's probably a little easier to get to Luka there.
Obviously people are going to debate between Jokic and Embiid. I know you were talking earlier about Jokic is really who you really like in that spot, but I look at Embiid on the other side, and I look at that Philadelphia offense. I'm like, it's going through him.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's been phenomenal without Ben Simmons on the floor this year. The biggest thing for me on DraftKings is that you have the massive price difference between Embiid and Jokic. And, I have Embiid projected for about 3.5 to 4 points more than Jokic, but there's a $1,500 price difference. And I think that makes a really big difference. When you factor in the salary and chances of reaching the score that you want them to, I have Jokic as someone that should be about 40% owned. I have Embiid should be about 25% owned. And the field is more or less agreeing with that. So I like being overweight on Embiid, but I also have a ton of Jokic. So it's just that I'm paying for both of them. One thing that I think is interesting to think about with Embiid, and I've kind of gone back and forth with it this morning, is on DraftKings, where basically the most efficiently priced team is the Celtics, part of me wants to make sure I have a Celtic with Embiid, because if you get 36 minutes from Embiid and he has a monster game, there's a really good chance someone on the Celtics had a big game. But the flip side of that is that you're just making less efficient lineups, basically, because you're forcing in one of the main Celtics guys at the expense of someone who's more favorably priced. So kind of been going back and forth on that. I've liked my exposures a little bit better by not doing that, but it's at least something to consider, when you're making your lineups.
On the strategy show, you did talk a lot about Jamal Murray, but if you were going to go Jamal Murray or Fred VanVleet, is there one that you prefer over the other?
I'm getting the more Murray right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel super confident about that. I think it's mostly an ownership thing. I'm doing my final DraftKings crunch now, so I'll have a better answer. But in the crunch I did before the show, we had VanVleet projected for a lot more ownership than Murray. It looks like that's come down a bit. But at that time, I was just basically getting to even with the field on Murray and then underweight on VanVleet. In general, it's a price range that I'm not getting to a ton. I'm going a little bit more stars and scrubs, at least in the builds I've had so far. But where I was getting to them, I was getting more Murray.
What's your thoughts on Joe Ingles?
Never exciting the roster, but the minutes should be there pretty much without question. He should have a little bit more of a role as a playmaker and just, a little bit higher usage without Mike Conley as well, primarily as a playmaker though. So I think he's a good value. I don't think he's someone that I'm like jamming over the top of the field on. I'm coming in right around the field.
If someone's playing the main slate, would you recommend maybe just kind of more going towards the later games as opposed to the 2 early games?
I'm personally getting a ton of exposure to the early games. I think going to the late games has merit because typically when games are spread out like this, you see more ownership concentrated on the early games. Also, obviously on slates where you're waiting on news, there's a huge edge to waiting for the late games. That's not the case here. But, I think you could certainly make the ownership argument. The problem that I'm having is that I think Utah obviously has what I think is the best value play on the slate in Clarkson. Denver has one of my favorite plays in Jokic. Toronto, I think, is just underpriced across the board, considering that Nick Nurse plays his starters so many minutes. It's really tough for me not to be wanting to get to them. Brooklyn, we already talked about, I think, in terms of upside, if the game stays close, Harris and Levert are both really underpriced. And then I think Philadelphia and Boston are both priced much more efficiently than any of the 4 teams playing in the early games. So it makes it, I think, tough for me to really go with that strategy.
As much as Nick Nurse will run his team into the ground, like I look at this and I go, is it the front office goes, look, this is an easy series for us. Let's not sit there and play a Kyle Lowry majority of the game. Let's kind of rest our core guys and get ready for the next round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's he could, but the thing is, like, he typically doesn't. Even if you look at the bubble games, he did give them some games off, but for the most part, you were still seeing Kyle Lowry go out there, play huge minutes, and Toronto didn't have anything to play for the entire time, if I remember correctly. If at any point they did, it wasn't for very long. So even in the preseason, you typically see him run his guys pretty big minutes. So there's certainly blowout potential, but the thing that we talk about a lot with that is if Toronto does just end this game in 3 quarters, it's probably because some combination of Lowry, Siakam, and VanVleet had a very, very good 3 quarters. So it doesn't really matter that much. Like, losing the blowout minutes to the team that's winning is not nearly as big a deal as it is losing the blowout minutes for the team that's losing. And I just would be shocked if Nurse comes out and just runs like a 10-man rotation just because he can.
Looking at the Raptors, Pascal Seahawkum is obviously someone that I've been high on for the last 2 years. I mean, this guy's played unbelievable basketball over the last 2 years. Do you like him more on one side as opposed to the other?
I actually love him on both sites. He's one of my highest owned guys right now on DraftKings because I think he's just underpriced relative to the other power forwards. But on FanDuel, he's a small forward, so his competition isn't really that steep. You have Kawhi Leonard looking at the small forwards on FanDuel. Kawhi Leonard, who obviously is a great play, but he's $1,900 more expensive. Tobias Harris is only $300 less. They project similarly to me, but I'd give the edge to Siakam. Gordon Hayward and Jaylen Brown are both there as perfectly fine plays. Joe Harris, but I think that the top end is just really lacking at small forward. So Siakam's going to be really appealing there. And then again, I just think he's a really good value on DraftKings.
Yeah, we got him at 31% ownership on DraftKings. How about Royce O'Neal at 3,500 on DraftKings? We got him right now at 37% ownership.
He's a great value. I think that he's definitely someone you should be considering, should be making, should be in strong consideration for cash games on whether, he actually ends up in there or not. But, I think the minutes will be there. I mentioned, I have him in for 38 minutes. I think it wouldn't be surprising if he topped 40 because he can play multiple positions and you really just don't want these other guys out there if you're Utah. So I think he'll be on the floor, which obviously is productive or is good for DFS, but he still has a 9.5% usage rate. He kind of just contributes. He contributes some defensive stats. He'll, knock down a shot or two. He'll grab some rebounds. He's not the highest upside guy. And in tournaments, these large field tournaments where you're trying to get first place and it's really, boom or bust, you need first place. Getting 26 fantasy points, even though it's a good point per dollar play, it's not that useful, especially if a third of the field is on him. It's one thing if you get 26 points and the guy that 1/3 of the field is on failed. That's really, really useful. But when 30% of the field has those 26 points, it doesn't really do a whole lot for you. So I don't mind being underweight on guys like Royce O'Neal in large field tournaments. But again, it's not because he doesn't project well. It's just because his range of outcomes is very, very similar to a lot of guys around him, whether it's Seth Curry or OG Anunoby, or to some extent, even though the minutes are much different, Alec Burks, than I guess the ownership dictates.
Anunoby is right in that same ownership level and the same price point as well.
Yeah, I like OG a little bit more than O'Neal. I just think that he's a little bit higher usage guy. Obviously still like 13 to 15% you would expect for OG, but that's still almost double what you expect for Royce O'Neal. He can rebound in this spot. Brooklyn also, I think, should be pretty sloppy here. Josh made the point that there should be a lot of defensive stats for OG, and I agree with that completely. So between I think they're very similar in terms of talking about the range of outcomes versus ownership problem. But I think that OG does have the little bit higher ceiling and a little bit higher projection.
I know you mentioned during the strategy show of talking about Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and obviously you got to pay up for Kawhi. And you mentioned about how you like Paul George.
Yeah, I like George a lot. I think he's a little bit easier or better on DraftKings. FanDuel, you run into the opportunity cost problem at shooting guard. Not saying he's still not a really good play, but that wouldn't get quite as much. On DraftKings, he's one of my highest owned guys just because he has forward eligibility, which isn't as deep of a position today, and he's really cheap. I'm expecting mid to upper 30s in minutes from him. He has, even when you look at games where Kawhi Leonard and Lou Williams played this year, he has a usage rate just shy of 28%, double-digit rebounding percentage, double-digit assist percentage. He should have his minutes staggered with Kawhi Leonard, you would expect. So all that looks really good. I think he projects lower than Kawhi, but the range of outcomes isn't drastically different, and he's just really inexpensive. So I'm getting to a ton of George. If it burns me, it burns me, but I think he looks like one of the better combinations of value and upside today.
Yeah, one of the questions we got asked about is two players we really haven't talked about, and this was a question related to DraftKings, and that was Levert and Donovan Mitchell.
I have a lot more Levert, and it really scares me because, kind of like I mentioned with Toronto, if this game blows out, and assuming Toronto's the one winning, it's not as big a deal typically for the Toronto guys as it will be for someone like Levert, because if the game blows out, it means Levert probably wasn't playing great, and then he's also not getting his fourth quarter run. So there's definitely risk there, but I think that especially on DraftKings at 7,600, where you can roster so many different guards, he's priced for the matchup. He projects for a usage rate, around 33, 34%. He's not a pure playmaker, but he's still going to be involved as a facilitator. He's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. He should play big minutes. I'm willing to take the risk on him. I am making sure wherever I have Levert, I have at least one of the main Toronto guys, because if Levert goes out there and has a big game, it's most likely a competitive game, in which case you're going to want at least one of those main Toronto guys. For Mitchell, just because even without Conley, the assist percentage doesn't really go up that much. He's still going to be losing usage to Jordan Clarkson when Clarkson's on the floor. Ingles will be used as a facilitator. I do think Mitchell plays huge minutes. I have him in for 40 minutes, and he projects well. It's just that he's a little bit more expensive than, for example, Levert on DraftKings.
In terms of some of the guards for the Brooklyn Nets, we we're kind of getting asking about Chris at 3,200 on DK. Is there besides Levert, obviously, is there other guys that have you interested at all on Brooklyn?
Not really. The 3,200 for Chiozza deserves a mention, just kind of in the same category as like the Ennis Cantor and Robert Williams mentioned, where when you're that cheap and you're low owned, not a lot needs to break your way for you to be a really good play. In Chiozza's case, the most likely way he becomes a good play is that this game is over after 3/4 and he plays the entire fourth, for example. So, I think if you're playing him, you probably don't want to pair him with like Levert or one of the main Brooklyn guys, but there's at least that path for him. Beyond that, it gets really tough because you have the pricing come up a bit on like Tyler Johnson and on Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, who is someone else that I would expect to benefit if this game does blow out. But there's a 25% salary difference between them and Chiozza. So if I were trying to get creative there, I think Chiozza would be the guy to go to. I personally don't think I'm going that route all that much. Actually, I'm definitely not doing it all that much. I don't know if I'm doing it at all, but he'd be the guy that I look to.
Looking at that 76ers and Celtics game, obviously without Ben Simmons, Al Horford, is going to get, in the starting lineup here, but he's 7,200 on DK. Is that price concern you?
Yeah, for sure. I have him in for 34 minutes, which by itself, I'm not super confident in. But even giving him that many minutes, he doesn't really come up for me on DraftKings because you're just comparing him in that price range to Michael Porter, to Pascal Siakam. Paul George isn't that much more expensive. Neither is Jason Tatum. So he's really not getting into DraftKings lineups for me. I think it is different on FanDuel where he's 5,300. You don't have Siakam at power forward. Basically there, he's competing with Porzingis, Tatum, and Porter, but he's at least $1,500 less. He's $1,500 less than Porter. He's like $3,000 less than Tatum and Porzingis. So I think he looks like a really good option on FanDuel and a really bad one on DraftKings.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are talking in chat. I guess FanDuel's having their issues once again. I was actually just able to get in on the app on my phone. So, but I know apparently they've been having a lot of issues once again today. I know they had some issues. Was it Friday? I want to say. Yeah,
they crashed. I think it was Friday. I'm not having any issues with it, so I'm actually keeping an eye on it because right now the $777 monster is 60% full. So if people haven't gotten back on within the next 15 minutes, I might be jumping in that.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of Philly, obviously we know Embiid is the number one option. I guess you say Harris is number two. Who's three?
Hot hand, probably. Out of the starters, it's Milton or Richardson. But it's if Burks comes off the bench and plays well, he probably gets more run at the expense of Milton. Richardson, I would think, gets his minutes regardless. But I think I agree. It's Embiid 1, obviously, Harris 2. And then other than that, it's probably just whoever's playing well, which in tournaments does give you a little bit of an opportunity because, for example, Shake Milton's expensive enough that I'm not really interested anyway. Same goes for Richardson. But Alec Burks, I think that if you play this game 1,000 times, he probably averages 20 to 24 minutes, somewhere in there. I think I have him projected for 22. But there's going to be games where he spikes because he comes off the bench, he plays well, and they leave him in because he's playing so well. So there's going to be some games where he goes out there and plays 26 minutes. And in those games, he's playing well, so he's scoring at an above average rate as well. So he's someone that I've interested in large field tournaments as a value play, not because I think he hits all that often, but because I think when he plays well, he'll be rewarded. There's a path to him getting more minutes, and he's not getting a lot of ownership, so I think it's worth the risk.
On the Boston side, we all know Tatum's the number one option. Is there someone else on that Boston lineup that you got a lot of shares in?
Not a lot of. Tatum's definitely the Boston guy that I have the most of. Kemba, I think, is the next most appealing price point. His salary is a little bit depressed because of the injury, but there's no real issue with the minutes for him. He played up to 32 minutes in the bubble, and they've said that he's not limited now. So I expect full run. The salary hasn't really recovered. That price range for guards is still one that I'm having trouble getting to. You have Murray, Van Vliet, Walker, and then there's just so many expensive players and cheap players I like that I'm not getting a ton of ownership combined in that area. But outside of Tatum, Kemba would be the guy that I'm most interested in from Boston.
So I just refreshed our ownership projections. Jordan Clarkson, 74% on DK.
Still probably 25% less than I'm going to have, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it starts to get to kind of what is your strategy? For me, so one thing too is you're talking about the biggest field tournaments where, for example, on DraftKings, you have 150K to first, you need to beat 25, 30,000 people, whatever it is. On one hand, there's more reward in that spot for saying, okay, I'm just not going to play Jordan Clarkson. I'm going to hope that something weird happens and that, these other value plays beat him. Sure, you can do that. The flip side, though, is when you get that many entries into a tournament, there's a lot more just dead bad lineups. And so there's kind of less merit to doing that. There's more merit to just being like, I'm going to have Jordan Clarkson in all of them because I think he's the best play, and I'm going to just beat the field at these other spots, which is my approach. So I think a lot of it comes down to kind of how contrarian you want to play. But when the ownership does get as high as it is, you certainly can make the case that, screw it, I'm not playing Clarkson. I'm just playing different. You obviously will have a lot bigger swings if you take that approach. So that should be factored into kind of if you can afford to be playing the tournament. But it's certainly at least a justifiable approach once the ownership gets to that point.
Yeah. We just mentioned about Kemba Walker, and someone asked a question that they've got 3 guards. You got to pick 2 on DraftKings, Murray, Kemba, or Van Fleet.
I have the most of Murray, then Kemba, then Van Vliet. One reason, but it does depend on kind of who else is in your lineup, because I know for sure that one reason I have so little Van Vliet is that I'm just prioritizing when you factor salaries and everything. I have more Siakam, I have more Lowry, I have more OG, I have more Gasol, and I'm only playing a maximum of, I think, 3 Raptors per lineup. So there's only so much room for Van Vliet.
Yeah. Luka Doncic, we got him at almost 30% now. And I know you guys earlier had talked about whether go Luka or Porzingis in that spot.
Yeah, I actually don't have a ton of either one right now. I really like both. I think on FanDuel, I'd probably have a little bit more Porzingis because he's a power forward. It's tough for me on DraftKings because you're comparing him to Embiid, to Jokic, to Gasol. You have Gobert and Allen, who are still good centers. So it's a little bit tougher to get there. Plus, he's getting a ton of ownership. I'm refreshing now to get the most recent, but I know he was at 30%, which was a little bit higher than I think he should be owned. So I wasn't getting to a ton. But, I think they're both really good plays if you can get there. I think that I like the matchup a little bit better for Porzingis. Kind of like I mentioned that you can certainly see the path where Steph Curry gets a few more shots because the Clippers want him to get more. You could also see where they choose to get the ball to make Porzingis beat them as opposed to Luka if the options between those two.
Let's say someone wants to fade Jokic, fade Embiid, and they want to save some salary and go with Jared Allen.
I think it's fine. I think if I'm doing that, I'd rather go to Porzingis. And also Allen's in the same boat for me as Levert. If I'm playing Allen, I want Toronto guys running it back, because if Jared Allen does get his 36 to 37 minutes, you have to assume that Lowry or Van Vliet or Siakam are getting 38 to 40. So they would most likely end up being really good plays too.
Juwan Morgan, I mean, is he even in your thought process of rostering?
I have him at 18 minutes. Basically, I just gave him the minutes I was giving to Emmanuel Mudiay. I took Mudiay out of the rotation. My assumption is that Morgan gets the start. He plays somewhere between 6 and 9 minutes in the first quarter, doesn't come back in the game, and then does the same thing in the third quarter. Obviously could be wrong, but I thought there was a good chance they would have a placeholder starter, basically just to keep Clarkson with the second unit. But I expect Clarkson to be closing the halves. So and obviously you're not expecting Morgan to be playing over Mitchell, Ingles, O'Neal, or Gobert. So it's tough to project him for more minutes than that.
I know a bunch of people have been asking about Paul Millsap.
I think he's kind of similar to Gasol, where I think you should expect more minutes from him now than you would in the regular season. By a few minutes. He averaged 32 minutes per game last year in the playoffs. I have him in for 30 here. It's still not someone I'm getting to a ton, but I do think that he benefits from Barton's injury because Jeremy Grant will play some of his minutes as the backup 3 behind Porter. I think that there's no reason Millsap can't be on the floor in this matchup. So I think Millsap's fine, just not someone that I'm really prioritizing here. But I do think that he plays more minutes in the playoffs. You should expect more minutes in the playoffs from Millsap than you got during the regular season.
Yeah, no, over on the Slack account, someone asking if we got any love for Lou Williams.
At the ownership he's getting, I have a little bit. I have him in for 30 minutes. He only got up to 24 or 25 in the bubble after having to be quarantined because he needed to get wings from Magic City. But I expect him to close this game. I think a lot of the time he's closing if it's competitive, and that he should be out there for around 30 minutes. He's not super expensive, and he's not getting a lot of ownership. So it's still tough to prioritize because there's so many guards that I like. But, I don't really think, last I checked, we have Williams at like 5% on DraftKings. Now we have him at 4%. I think he should be higher owned than that.
Magic City needs to give Lou Williams a sponsorship deal.
They already named their wings after.
I mean, I want to know, since the bubble, how many people have walked in there who've never had the wings before?
Right. Yeah, he should just be getting like revenue share on the wings.
Give him a little piece of the pie. Give him like a 5% cut on the wings, man. Yeah, apparently a lot of people are still having trouble with FanDuel. Is there a player we haven't talked about that you think that has your eye?
I don't think so. Gasol obviously was one of the big ones. No, I mean, I think we've definitely hit on most of my highest owned guys. I'm kind of trying to scroll through my spreadsheet and see if there's anybody. Norman Powell, I'm getting a decent amount of.
Mm-hmm.
He's just, another. I expect around 30 minutes from him because I expect a tight rotation from Toronto. He's inexpensive. He clearly isn't as exciting as the main guys, but I think the ownership should be a lot lower on him than it will be on the other guys as well.
Yeah, I mean, we got him at 10% ownership, where Seth Curry, who's $800 cheaper, is around the same ownership.
Yeah, I mean, the crunch I just ran, I actually got the 30% Powell on DraftKings. I might end up cutting that back a little bit because it's Norman Powell, but I do think that looking at the ownership and everything, it's a pretty good play.
Looking at the ownership on someone who's at 7,400, Jaylen Brown at 5.7%.
I think that, I mean, he's one where it's just really, I don't have him in any of the lineups I'm playing on DraftKings. It's not like that would be surprising if Jaylen Brown goes out there and has the big game. It's just that I think the Boston pricing is really efficient. So there's naturally, and this is talking DraftKings, I think he's a better play on FanDuel. I think there's just naturally opportunity cost there because you're sacrificing some underpriced guys. And then you kind of just have to run really pure to get him to be the guy. When you have a healthy Jason Tatum, you have a healthy Kemba Walker. Like, he's clearly taking a back seat to these guys in most games, at least offensively. So that's not a spot I'm going to. But, again, it kind of just comes down to strategy too. Like, if you're playing a more contrarian strategy than I do, I certainly factor in ownership, but I don't go completely off the board, especially in NBA. Getting 5% of a guy as good as Jaylen Brown is at least a reason to consider it.
I know for the people who did not see the end of the strategy show where you talked about your top plays on each site, you just want to kind of go over for those people who didn't have a chance to see that.
Yeah. I'm max entering DraftKings today, getting a ton of Jokic, 100% Jordan Clarkson, tons of George, a lot of Levert, a lot of Joe Harris, which terrifies me, but I'm running it back with a lot of Toronto. Have a lot of Siakam, decent amount of Kyle Lowry. Mentioned I had a lot of Powell, OG Anunoby. I'm coming in right around the field. I think those are my highest owned guys.
If you had to pick one or the other, Luka or Embiid, who do you think is more valuable today?
I have more Embiid.
Of course, line up those questions right there on the YouTube chat. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button. We got 1,700 people here in the chat. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button. We really do appreciate it. It does help us out a lot. Of course, we are sponsored by SuperDraft. Of course, you got to go to superdraft.io, where the future of daily fantasy sports has arrived. Experience SuperDraft's exclusive game mode multiplier. Say goodbye to salary restrictions. Hello to lineup freedom. Use your fantasy sports knowledge to draft any player you want and build your very own dream team. Countless lineup possibilities let you experience daily fantasy sports the way you want. SuperDraft offers contests for NBA, MLB, PJ, NASCAR, and MMA, so you can enjoy the best of DFS all year round. Sign up for SuperDraft today using the promo code Awesemo10, and it's $10 free on your first deposit of $10 or more and $20 total free on your first deposit of $100 or more. Download the App Store or play at superdraft.io. SuperDraft, no limits, more winning. Now, the promo that we got going on here until August the 24th is for an Awesemo Plus NBA weekly pass for $824 when you use the promo code MAMBA at checkout. That's 50% off all the Awesemo premium NBA DFS tools and content, including player projections, ownership projections, and the Boom Bust tool and more. As I mentioned, this offer is valid through Mamba Day on August the 24th. Thinking about some other, let me see. How about Rudy Gobert? You got any love for him?
Not really. Not that I mind the spot. I think he does play big minutes here. I expect him to be out there pretty much every minute that Jokic is. But it's just the position. If I'm going to the mid range, I'd rather get the Porzingis, and I just really like paying for Jokic or Embiid. But then I also like have some interest in the value guys with Gasol and to a lesser extent with Zubats. So I'm just not really getting to the mid range guys.
By the way, for the people asking about the Jimi Hendrix artwork, this is in one of my studios for my company. We have a couple studios. This is just one of the studios that we do have. I do most of my work from home, but this is one of the studios I have. Do you like playing Luka and Porzingis together?
If I do, I want at least one of Paul George or Kawhi. So I don't have any lineups with them together, but I think that if you were building some game stacks, like you can go that approach. The thing is just that you don't want, you have to think how the game plays out. Obviously Luka and Porzingis can have a big game at the same time, but if that happens, you're probably getting 36 plus minutes from Kawhi and from Paul George. So there's a really good chance that that whole group is doing well.
What about Torrey Craig?
I think I'm right around the field on him, like 8%. Not anyone you're interested in, but another one of those sub 4K guys on DraftKings that kind of just makes your lineup work. That should play 30, low to mid 30s. Run around, do a whole bunch of nothing. You hope that you get lucky and you get some fast break dunks.
What about pairing Lou Williams with Kawhi and George in a lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I would want. I don't have any lineups with Kawhi and George together. If I did, though, again, I'd be forcing in some Porzingis and Luka. The same goes, if I'm playing Lou Williams with those guys, I'd want to be bringing you back with Dallas, because you're looking at they're not cheap. The guys on the Clippers, they're the leading scorers for the team. So if they go out there and have ceiling games, for them to have a ceiling game, you basically need Dallas to hang in this game for multiple of the Clippers to have monster games. And if Dallas hangs in the game, you know exactly where the points are coming from. So I'd want to be kind of just turning it into a game stack at that point.
We've mentioned a lot about Porzingis, Luka, Seth Curry. Anything else on Dallas interest you?
No, I'm not getting the Finney Smith. I'm not getting the Tim Hardaway. I can't imagine getting to anyone beyond those guys.
Denver, Jeremy Grant?
I'm not. I think so. The thing with Grant is there's going to be some matchups where they really need him out there defensively. This isn't one of them. So I have trouble projecting more than like 30 minutes for him. And he's not a really high per minute player, especially when you're talking about Jokic and Murray being on the floor for a high percentage of minutes. I think that there will be some other matchups, like, for example, if they were playing the Clippers, where Michael Porter is not defending Kawhi Leonard or Paul George and Jeremy Grant would need it. Those games, you can start projecting him for more minutes. But this is one where, I think Malone most likely gives Porter, upper 30s, because there's no reason that he can't. So not really the matchup until I see otherwise that I'm projecting a ton of minutes for Jeremy Grant.
Just because of what the current state of the Jazz is Donovan Mitchell like a guy that it should be in everyone's consideration to put in your lineup?
Consideration, yeah, because he's clearly the number one offense. He's the only guy out there that is really a true scorer. The problem, though, is just that he doesn't get like a huge uptick without Conley. The usage doesn't change a whole lot, and replacing Conley with Jordan Clarkson isn't going to open up a bunch more usage for Mitchell either. The assist percentage doesn't really go up a ton. The biggest argument for him is that he's going to play monster minutes. He was playing around 40 minutes a game in the playoffs last year. No real reason to think that changes here, but he's just still doesn't project quite as well as a lot of the other guys in his price range.
Two of the high projection guys that we have is Jordan Clarkson and Joe Harris. And someone had asked if we had to pick one, who would you pick? See, for me, I would go Harris to get away from the high ownership of Clarkson. So, I mean, I'm going both, but Clarkson would be the one that I'd pick first. Like right now, I'm putting my DraftKings lineups in, but it looks like I have 100% Clarkson and 70% Harris. I'm more scared of Harris than I am of Clarkson. Mm-hmm. They both easily could fail, but it's just I think they're two of the best plays on DraftKings. Got a question about picking two of these three: Tobias Harris, Paul George, and Pascal Siakam. Harris, George. I have
more Siakam and George than Harris.
I guess apparently people are still having issues with FanDuel.
Yeah, I'm kind of bummed I didn't get around to making a lineup there because there's still like 100 spots open in the monster.
We got asked about Boban if he's someone you're looking at.
No, I think at most he plays like 6 minutes.
Do you think people are too high on Pascal Seahawkum in this spot?
I hope not, because I have like 75%.
I know a lot of people have asked about these two players, and for the people that missed it, talk about Levert or Donovan Mitchell.
I have Levert over Mitchell just because of the ceilings. Like Levert obviously comes with a lot of blowout risk. I guess not that Utah doesn't either, but it's really like there's risk. You can see how Toronto just wipes Brooklyn off the floor, but Levert's going to be like that entire offense. He has a higher usage percentage than Mitchell under the current conditions. The assist percentage will be similar for Levert. He probably plays a little bit less than Mitchell, but not enough to make a huge difference. He's a little bit less expensive. So all of that is getting me to more Levert.
Yeah, my concern with the Raptors is what happens if the game's over in the third quarter?
Oh, yeah. Then, for the Raptors, I think you're fine. Because if the game's over, then they scored a lot of points. But for Levert and for Harris, you're screwed if that's the case.
Yeah. Lou Williams or Marcus Smart?
Lou Williams.
Someone asked about thoughts about Ibaka. I know he's got the injury-related issue. I want to say he's questionable.
Yeah, I'm not high on him. He wasn't on the injury report for what it's worth, but I'm not high on him because, like I said, I'm trusting what Nick Nurse did last postseason and giving the bulk of the center minutes to Gasol. I don't expect them to play alongside each other much, if at all. So until I see otherwise, I'm treating it like a timeshare, but like Gasol gets the drastic advantage.
Garrett Temple, is he someone that intrigues you?
More so on FanDuel. He's really cheap there relative to some other guys. On DraftKings, he's cheap too, but he's basically like the same price as Joe Harris.
In terms of value plays, I mean, obviously we talked a lot about Jordan Clarkson and a couple other guys, but is there a value play that we haven't mentioned?
I don't think so. Nothing that I'm like confident in. Like I'm kind of obviously I'm just across 150 lineups. I'm playing a lot of different guys, but as far as guys I'm concentrated on, we've hit them.
Yeah, just seeing if we have an update on ownership projections or not. So yeah, we still have Clarkson at 74%. I mean, that's just, man, I get it. I understand it, but man, that is high.
Oh yeah, it is. It's definitely to the point where, like I said, if you typically play a more contrarian style, you can certainly be getting away at that ownership. For me, I still am just jamming in over the top of it.
Now, if Harrell plays tonight, how does that affect your thought process on Zubac?
It makes the minutes, I think, less stable. I still think Zubac is okay. Like I think I have him at 22 minutes. Harrell playing though is concerning because you can have Harrell play like 20 minutes. You can have Zubac play 20 to 22 and then go with the small lineup to close.
What's your take on Marcus Morris?
He's a good value in terms of points per dollar. So it's tough for him to get shots up when you're playing with Lou Williams and George and Kawhi, but he should be out there for 34 to 36 minutes at least. And, so yeah, I think he's a good value just kind of as like a glue guy in lineups, for lack of a better word.
We've talked about a couple of different Celtics. We talked about Canner. We talked about Williams. We talked about Kemba. We talked about Marcus Smart. We talked about Tatum. We haven't talked about Gordon Hayward.
He's really similar to Brown for me, where it's not like it would be surprising if he has a good game, but there's just so many guys that I'm getting to before him that I'm not really prioritizing him or getting him at all.
Moving on to is there a particular team that you're paying attention to right now when it comes to ownership?
For my personal ownership, Toronto, I'm getting a lot of. Not as far as the field goes, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it again. I think my fear just Toronto is what happens if this game's just over quick. Where they wiped them out of the floor in the first half.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest risk to the game.
I know people are asking about Paul Millsap and B. We've talked about a lot. About Alex Burks.
I think he's someone that I'll have some of in tournaments. I'm not confident in his minutes, but I think he's a decent option. If he plays well, he should get more on, which is nice.
In terms of the high price options, who is the one that you have the least confidence in to pay off that price?
I guess technically Luka, just because he's the most expensive and I don't have much of him. Obviously it's Luka, but I think Luka's less likely to pay off 11K than Jokic is to pay off 8,700, for example.
Of course, we're just a couple minutes away before lock is going to take place. Of course, you want to take advantage of that promo we got going over at Awesemo.com using the promo code Mamba. That deal is coming up here on August the 24th, where you can get 50% off all of Awesemo's premium NBA DFS tools. You gotta use those tools to get in there. Of course, be sure to hit that thumbs up button here. Get those last minute questions in before we do go to lock here. Anthony saying Clarkson and Siakam or Van Fleet and Harris.
Clarkson, Seahawkum. That I don't think those salaries make sense. But
is there one salary on either site that you're just blown away by?
Jordan Clarkson on DraftKings. Jokic on DraftKings. Siakam on, I guess, both sites really is way too cheap.
Someone asked about Mike Scott of the Sixers.
I think I have him playing like 14 or 16 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Tobias Harris, I feel like we really haven't talked much about him. He's a clear number 2 option there.
Yeah, I'm right around the field on him. DraftKings, I have 11%. We haven't projected for 10% ownership. I think he plays huge minutes. He typically leads the team in minutes. He's the second scorer. I think he's perfectly fine. It's just that I don't have him ahead of like Tatum or Siakam. So it's tough to get too much of him.
Would you go with Zubac or Gasol on DraftKings?
I have more Gasol, I hope. Didn't double check it, but I think that should be the case.
Would you put Horford and Embiid in the same lineup?
On FanDuel, it's okay because they're both really cheap. On DraftKings, I wouldn't. But again, that's mostly just because I'm not getting Horford.
Of course, we're about to go lock here just in under 1 minute from now. Anything you're looking forward to in terms of the later games, in terms of the late slate that from a DFS angle?
Seeing I guess how the Boston Philly game should be just really fun, I think. But from DFS, I think the big thing will be the Clippers rotation and the Dallas rotation. Obviously my guess is that you're getting fewer minutes from Zubac, more minutes from Lou Williams for the Clippers, but that'll be something to keep an eye on. Keeping an eye on like Seth Curry's minutes for Dallas. And then also we are still technically waiting on news from the Clippers on Pat Beverly and Landry Shamet.
Oh, Sixers Celtics is my go-to watch game of the day.
Yeah.
I don't know what I guess number 2 would be Mavericks Clippers.
Yeah, that's the order. Well, I'm going to be watching the Toronto game the closest because that has a huge impact on my day. But I'm with you as far as NBA watchability.
Of course, that is going to wrap it up for NBA Live Before Lock here. Of course, be locked here on Awesemo. Got a tons of shows coming up here later on today. MLB Live Before Lock to get you ready for today's slate of MLB action. Of course, Adam, let everyone know everything find out on social media before we get out of here, man.
Find me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS.
And of course, I am at Jason_Floyd. And that is going to do it for the NBA Live Before Lock show right here on Awesemo.com.